An elderly woman took a homeless man home, but when she found out who he was, she didn't know what to do. A young man sat motionless on the bench, staring into the distance with his huge green eyes. Despite his disheveled appearance, he was handsome. The breeze was intense, his hair was dirty, the subway station platform was crowded at that moment, but people walked by, bumping into the handsome young man, and quickly averting their eyes, preoccupied with their own troubles. Helen was sitting on one of the nearby benches, silently observing the boy from time to time. Every weekend, she would leave the station and head to the house in the mountains she bought after retiring. She spent every weekend there and sometimes stayed during the cold weather. Helen was a woman of about 70 years old, living alone, who had devoted her entire life to working as a respected lawyer. Besides that, she had never had a family. One day, as she was waiting for the train to head home, she noticed this boy there for the first time. She couldn't understand why, but at that moment, her heart ached, recalling an old wound that had never fully healed. The first time she was in a hurry because she was worried about missing the train, but throughout the day, taking care of her garden, she couldn't concentrate at all, as a strange pain in her heart troubled her day and night. Before her eyes, like an obsession, there was the face of that boy from the station. The resemblance was striking. The boy looked remarkably like Anthony, her first and only love, whom she had lost so foolishly. Anthony was the most beautiful boy in the world to her, and she was hopelessly in love with him. However, she was painfully aware of their social inequality and was constantly jealous of everyone around them. Miss Helen always felt that she, being the daughter of a cleaning lady and not knowing her father, was not a good match for Anthony. Anthony was born into a successful real estate brokerage family. She feared that Anthony would soon realize this as well. She was so jealous of everyone around them, and this caused them to argue a lot, but they always made up. However, one day Anthony's patience ran out, and he said it was all over between them. Miss Helen disappeared for a few months, holding on to resentment, but finally realizing that her life had no meaning without Anthony. She went to his house with the cake he loved the most to apologize and rekindle their relationship, but it was too late. Anthony had moved away, and nothing in the world helped Helen find her boyfriend, causing her extreme anxiety. Because of this, she started drinking heavily, but after a while she managed to stop and pull herself together, immersing herself in work to occupy her mind. With time, the pain diminished, but her personal life never worked out with anyone. Nevertheless, Miss Helen did not complain about life, as she believed everything was fine, and she planned to live peacefully in retirement. But the encounter at the station awakened forgotten memories in her, and these memories would not let her live in peace. She had been suffering for 2 days, convincing herself that everything would be fine with that boy. But back in town, Miss Helen saw him again in the same place. However, she couldn't bear it and went up to him, asking, "Why are you sitting here all the time? What happened to you?" "I don't know," whispered the boy with a lifeless voice. Miss Helen was intrigued by his response, but the next day she firmly extended her hand and told him to follow her. The boy looked at her suspiciously, but grabbed her hand and then stood up, but he suddenly stumbled. Miss Helen realized that he probably hadn't eaten anything during those days. As soon as they arrived at her house, Helen gave him some toiletries and some clothes she bought along the way. While the young man took a shower, she ordered takeaway food through a delivery app. When her guest came out of the bathroom, clean and groomed, Miss Helen thought he looked even more like Anthony. She even imagined that at the boy's age, he could be her son or even her grandson with Anthony. But sadly, she had ruined everything and ended up alone. She learned her lesson, that jealousy was toxic and meaningless, but it was too late. Miss Helen set the table and offered dinner for them to eat, and she cautiously asked the boy what his name was. However, the boy replied, "I don't remember," and started to cry. Because of this, Miss Helen regretted asking and decided to take him to her friend Dr. Michael, a psychiatrist, hoping that he could help the poor lad. But Dr. Michael wasn't so optimistic without knowing the cause of the amnesia, making it difficult to conduct any analysis. After the examination, he said that the young man had ingested some kind of substance, and the dosage was so high that it caused memory loss. Nonetheless, his health seemed to be fine because he survived, and his mental health was not affected. However, he would be able to remember everything on his own, but the doctor couldn't specify when. The main point for him now was to lead a peaceful life. After hearing the verdict, Miss Helen decided to take the young man to her house in the mountains. Life in nature helped the boy regain his vitality, and a smile began to appear on his face. It turned out that he was a good cook and loved gardening. However, his memory was never recovered. One day, the young man was enthusiastically pruning a plant while Miss Helen was watering roses nearby, thinking aloud, "I love flowers, especially roses. They're the reason why I bought this house when I came to live here. I think this place is paradise on earth, as the roses bloom so beautifully." Miss Helen suddenly lost her voice when she saw the boy fall to the ground with a scream. Miss Helen immediately rushed to the boy's aid, and he said, "I remembered everything. My name is Roger, and I was mugged," he whispered, starting to cry, recalling what happened. "I don't have a home anymore, and I also don't have a job," he added, sobbing. After calming down a bit, Roger said that he never knew his father, and his mother died behind the wheel of a car when he was just 5 years old. He was placed in an orphanage, and when he grew up, he returned to his mother's apartment. He learned the profession of a pastry chef and got a job dreaming of saving up for a countryside house, but he knew it would take years. Suddenly, a businessman decided to build several houses in a beautiful area. So he bought a large plot of land for a good price, and Roger began searching for ads for houses for sale, immediately coming across a charming place with a large rose garden. There was so much fragrance and beauty there that Roger immediately decided to buy a house in that area. That's why when you mentioned roses, something immediately clicked in my head, and my memory came back," said Roger. He also remembered that the man, the owner of the place he wanted to live in, seemed like an elderly, respectable man. They scheduled a meeting at the registry office for the contract signing and money exchange. Roger agreed to go with the man to a diner and have coffee together, and that was the last thing he could remember. He woke up in a puddle of mud outside the train station and managed to find a bench on the platform. So he sat there until Miss Helen approached him. "Thank you, Miss Helen. There are no more compassionate people like you," he added. "Do you mind if I stay with you a little longer? I simply have nowhere to go, but I'll find a job and reimburse all your expenses." "Stay as long as you need, of course. The house is now yours too. It would be great to have company," Helen replied to him. The owner of the former pastry shop where he worked agreed to hire Roger again, as she highly valued talented people like him. After he disappeared, the shop owner tried to find him, and she even reported it to the police, but nothing was done about the young man's disappearance. At Miss Helen's insistence, Roger filed a police report, but the case ended up unsolved. The alleged house owner was a fraud, and the sales contract was a lie. The person who did this to him covered all traces of his fraud. Miss Helen was desperate to do something to help the poor young man and decided to try to find his relatives, or rather, make sure that there were no one left. She asked Roger for a photo of his mother and placed an advertisement on the internet. A few weeks later, she received a phone call. It was the voice of a man on the phone who seemed familiar, asking eagerly about the photo on the website. "I am the father of the girl in the photo. What's wrong with her? I haven't seen her in 20 years, said the man. Miss Helen became tense, silent, not knowing how to tell the man on the phone that his daughter had died. Gathering her strength, she replied, "I'm so sorry, but your daughter is dead. But you have a grandson, Roger, who is already grown up." She heard sobs, and then the man asked for the address and said he would come there soon in the evening. Miss Helen told Roger about the call, and he was emotional to discover that he had a real grandfather. He impatiently awaited his arrival, while Miss Helen was saddened, realizing she would soon lose her new and only friend. Roger, seeing that the elderly woman was upset, thought of her. He prepared a hot tea for her, telling her that she needed to take care of herself because there were no more people like her. And looking at Roger, Miss Helen thought that apparently her destiny was to be alone. Due to these thoughts, Miss Helen stayed awake all night, and in the morning the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she was paralyzed because there stood her Anthony, right on the doorstep. He had aged, but he looked as handsome as ever. The man was in shock and began to cry. Miss Helen embraced Anthony and took him to sit on the couch. When he collected himself, he immediately told her the whole story. His daughter, Kate, was always cheerful and stubborn, but she studied well and even graduated with honors from a prestigious university. However, unfortunately, at the age of 24, she met Dean, who had several criminal records. And Anthony, of course, was against their relationship, but he pushed his daughter too hard and she ran away from home. Anthony used all the contacts he could, but they couldn't find her. The elderly man fell silent and tears welled up in his eyes. "I'm so sorry." That was all Miss Helen could say. "But you still have a beautiful grandson." He looked at Miss Helen with sweet eyes and said, "Miss Helen, you have us now too." Miss Helen's heart raced, and she looked at Anthony with incomprehensible eyes. "You won't get rid of us that easily. I want to know about you. We didn't meet again by chance." Helen told her story and her perceptions of the past, and young Roger was moved to see the happiness of the two and to have found his family. After that day, Miss Helen and Anthony couldn't stay away from each other, and naturally, their love was rekindled. Time passed, and before long, the two got married and merged their lives. Even with all the time separated by fate, everyone was immensely happy to have, in their own way, found a real family that remains increasingly united to this day. If you know any stories like this one, please leave a comment, like the video, share with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more fantastic stories.